I suppose it's only fair to let everyone know, David Harper said, raising his glass as if he were delivering a toast. We've already arranged for Linda and me to handle all decisions when George isn't of sound mind anymore. Smiled at the laughter that rippled through the dining room. My daughter Linda, seated beside him in her navy dress, nodded without a word. Every eye turned to me, and the clink of silverware seemed to echo in my skull. My name is George Whitman. I'm 77 years old, a retired aerospace engineer from Ohio who spent 4 decades designing parts that kept planes in the air. I've built my life the way I built machines, meticulously, with patience, precision, and care. I married once, buried my wife too soon, and poured everything I had into raising Linda, my only child. For years, I believed hard work and loyalty were the foundation of family. That evening, in my own home, I felt both crumble under me. David is a man of sharp suits and sharper intentions. He married Linda 15 years ago, promising to take care of her. Somewhere along the way, he decided taking care of her meant taking control of me. I've never cared for his easy smirk, the way he sprinkles compliments like bait before snapping them back with a hook. That night, his toast wasn't a joke, it was a declaration. Linda didn't look at me when she nodded. She stared at the table, fingers lightly circling the rim of her wineglass. She'd once been my shadow as a girl, following me to the garage to hand me wrenches, asking how engines breathed. Now, she couldn't meet my eyes. I caught the gaze of Evelyn Ross across the table. She was a lawyer now, but I remembered her. As the fresh-faced intern I mentored back when she was fresh out of college. She gave me a polite smile, the kind lawyers give when they're about to say something unpleasant. Next to her sat Pastor Clark, who had baptized Emily when she was just a baby. His brow furrowed, but he said nothing. I told myself not to react, not to give David the satisfaction. Instead, I lifted my fork and tasted the roast beef. It was dry, overcooked, Linda's specialty when she was distracted. Conversations resumed, in cautious bursts, like people unsure whether a storm had passed or was just beginning. I should have been celebrating. 77 years, a career I was proud of, a daughter, a granddaughter, and a quiet nest egg, $15 million hidden in a trust fund, set aside to make sure my family would never know the hunger or the fear of bills I had once known. But in that moment, it didn't feel like my future was mine to give. After dinner, guests drifted into the living room for coffee and cake. I noticed a man I didn't recognize by the fireplace, holding a leather portfolio. He was lean, in his 30s, with a clinical smile. David beckoned him over. "George, this is Alan, a specialist in elder care assessments," David said, as if introducing me to a golf partner. "He's here to help us plan for, well, you know." No, I didn't know, or maybe I did. Alan opened his portfolio and began asking questions that made my skin prickle. Did I ever forget where I put things? Did I sometimes lose track of dates? How often did I handle my own finances? The room was still full of family, and I could feel the unspoken judgments simmering behind polite expressions. Linda hovered nearby, offering coffee to guests, pretending not to hear. When Alan asked if anyone had noticed changes in my decision-making, David chuckled and said, "Let's just say there's been a few questionable calls lately." I excused myself before I threw my coffee in his face. In the kitchen, I stood, at the counter, staring at the empty dessert plates. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I'd passed FAA safety inspections on equipment that cost more than David's entire salary. But apparently, I wasn't competent enough to decide how to live the rest of my life. Emily slipped in behind me, a quiet presence in a sea of noise. 19 years old, my granddaughter had inherited her mother's eyes, but none of her coldness. She wore a black sweater smudged with charcoal dust from her drawings. She didn't say anything at first, just picked up a stray fork and began scraping frosting off it with her teeth. "You okay, Grandpa?" she asked softly. I wanted to say yes. Instead, I told her to enjoy her cake. When I returned to the dining room, David was laughing with Evelyn. He had his arms slung around Linda's chair, like a man satisfied with the state of his empire. The portfolio was gone. So was my appetite. As the evening wound down, Linda kissed my cheek and thanked me for hosting. David's handshake was firm, the kind men give when they think they've already won. I walked them to the door, watched their car disappear down the driveway, and stood in the quiet until the cold crept into my bones. I went to my study, opened the safe behind the bookcase, and took out the small velvet pouch I kept inside. The weight of the pocket watch in my palm was familiar, grounding. My father had carried it through years of factory shifts and war, the silver worn smooth where his thumb had traced it. I clicked it open and listened to the steady tick. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt different, emptier somehow. I kept replaying David's words, the smug curl of his lip, the way Linda had nodded. It wasn't just an insult. It was a claim, a quiet signing over of my life while I was still breathing. And the worst part was, they'd said it in front of everyone, as if I wouldn't dare to object. At 3 a.m, I got up, put on a coat, and went back to the safe. The pocket watch was there, but the envelope containing my most recent trust documents was not. The space where it should have been was bare. The wind rattled the window. Somewhere far away, I heard the faint chime of a clock. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about hurt feelings or careless words. Someone had already started dismantling my life piece by piece, and they were counting on me to let them finish. 2 mornings after that dinner, I woke to the low hum of the furnace and the faint sound of a truck idling outside. When I pulled back the curtain, I saw a man in a brown jacket loading something from my porch into a van. By the time I got the door open, he was already climbing into the driver's seat. A single envelope lay on the welcome mat, stamped with the name of my bank. I brewed coffee before opening it, more out of habit than calm. Inside was a statement from the trust account I had built over decades. It listed every holding, every asset until my eyes caught the subtraction. $2 million, withdrawn in a single transfer, notated simply, reallocation to Linda Harper Medical Provision. I read it twice, each word heavier than the last. Medical provision for whom? The bank's automated line confirmed the transaction was authorized. When I asked who authorized it, the voice read back my daughter's name. My hands didn't shake. They curled into fists. I'd taught Linda to work for everything she wanted. Now she was taking without asking. I called her, half hoping it was some mistake. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, I'm just on my way to a meeting. Can we talk later?" Her voice was breezy, rushed. The way people sound when they've already decided they're not going to listen. "It's $2 million, Linda. I think we can talk now," I said. There was a pause. David and I, we thought it was time to set aside funds for your care. You never know what might happen, and it's better to prepare while we can. Care, the word tasted like rust. You could have prepared with me, Not over me, I replied. She sighed. It's done, Dad. Evelyn made sure everything was legal. We just want to keep you safe. The line went dead before I could answer. I stared at the receiver until the dial tone dissolved into silence. That afternoon, I drove into town to see Evelyn Ross. Her office was on Main Street, the same building where she'd once shadowed me at my engineering firm to learn how to draft technical contracts. She greeted me with the professional smile I'd seen at the dinner, the one that kept emotion behind glass. George, I was going to call you, she said, ushering me into a chair. I understand you have concerns about the trust reallocation. Concerns, I said, is one way to put it. Evelyn folded her hands. Linda and David wanted to ensure your medical costs could be met without delay if something urgent happened. Transferring funds to Linda allows quicker access than going through the trustees process. It's a common precaution for someone your age. I leaned forward. $2 million is not a precaution. It's a raid, and my age doesn't give anyone the right to strip me of control. Her gaze didn't waver, but her tone softened. I know you value independence, but in situations like these, sometimes family makes decisions you may not like, thinking they're in your best interest. Family should talk before they take, I said. You taught me that once, when you were just a law student. She didn't answer, just glanced at the framed degrees on her wall. I left before she could offer me coffee. On the way home, I stopped at the church. Pastor Clark was in his office, sorting through boxes of canned goods for the winter drive. He looked up when I entered. George, hadn't seen you on a weekday in a while. I told him about the withdrawal, about the conversation with Linda. He listened without interruption, his large hands resting on the desk. Sometimes, he said finally, people convince themselves that control is the same as care. They forget that respect is part of love. I nodded. Feels less like they forgot, and more like they're hoping I don't notice. He smiled faintly. The question is, what will you do now that you have noticed? That night, I went through my filing cabinet. I found the older statements, the neat progression of deposits and interest that had built the trust into $15 million. The numbers told the story of a man who had worked overtime shifts, invested cautiously, and never spent more than he had. In the back of the drawer was a photograph of Linda at 12 years old, holding the pocket watch in her small hands. She had wanted to take it to school for show and tell. I'd told her it was too important, and she'd understood back then. The next morning, I visited the bank in person. The branch manager confirmed the withdrawal had been processed under a durable power of attorney signed by Linda years ago. It's perfectly valid, she said, sliding the document across the desk. My daughter's signature looked young, confident, a version of her I remembered. On my way out, I passed Alan, the elder care assessor, from the dinner standing in line. He glanced at me, then looked away quickly. My stomach tightened. When I got home, I found a padded envelope in the mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, the inside of my study safe, its shelves empty except for the velvet pouch. The picture had been taken recently. I could tell by the scuff mark on the safe's bottom corner, one I'd made last month. No note, no explanation, just proof that someone had been there. I locked the door behind me and went straight to the study. The pouch was still inside, and the pocket watch still ticked. But knowing someone had opened that safe without me changed everything. The trust account wasn't the only thing they were moving without my consent. I sat at the desk until the light outside faded, the photograph lying in front of me, somewhere between the bank's tidy records and that silent picture. I understood that my family wasn't waiting for me to grow weak. They were preparing for it, planning around it, and taking what they wanted before I could stop them. The next step wasn't to confront them. It was to learn exactly how far they'd already gone. 3 days after I confronted Evelyn, an email from Emily landed in my inbox at 2:14 a.m. The subject line read simply, "Help." There was no greeting, no drawn-out explanation, just a single paragraph typed in lowercase letters. She wrote that her parents had told her to decline an art scholarship she'd been offered, insisting she accept an early placement in the business program David's firm sponsored. "It's not what I want," she typed. "They say art won't pay the bills. I think they're using my name for something." Attached was a photo. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at, grainy, dimly lit, then my stomach turned. It was my study safe, door swung wide. Every shelf was bare. Even the folders of documents I kept in the back were gone. The only thing left in the corner was the velvet pouch holding my father's pocket watch. The photo had been taken from above, as if someone taller than Emily had leaned in with their phone. I called her before the sun was up. She answered on the third ring, whispering, "Grandpa, I can't talk long." Dad checks my phone. "Emily, when was that picture taken?" 2 nights ago. "I heard them in your study while you were at the store. Mom told me not to ask questions. Why send it to me? Because I think they're going to sell the watch next. They were talking about how collectors pay a lot for family pieces." Her voice wavered. "I don't want to lose it. You told me it was from your dad." I kept my voice even. "Leave the watch where it is. I'll take care of it." She went quiet, then said, "I can't stop them from changing my classes, but I can warn you." And then she was gone. That afternoon, I drove past the high school where Emily had once won a county art contest. I remembered the way she'd held her charcoal drawing of an old barn, smudges on her cheeks, grinning as if the ribbon in her hand meant the whole world. Now, someone else was mapping her future like a property deed, assigning her to an office before she'd even had a chance to choose. I went home and checked the safe myself. The pouch was there. The watch ticked steadily. Everything else was gone. Late in the day, Linda called. Her voice was sharper than usual. "Dad, I hear you've been talking to Emily about things she doesn't understand." "She understands more than you think," I said. "She knows my safe's been emptied." There was a pause, then a sigh. "We took documents that needed to be updated. David's accountant is consolidating everything for efficiency. It's better this way." "Better for who?" "For everyone. We're trying to protect you and Emily, but you can't expect a teenager to see the big picture. She sees enough to know you're forcing her out of the one thing she loves," I said. Linda's tone cooled. "Grandpa's little artist routine won't pay tuition or rent. We're making sure she has security. Security doesn't mean locking someone in a life they don't want." She hung up without another word. That night, I sat in the dark with the watch in my hand, listening to the seconds click by. Each one felt like a grain of sand slipping through my fingers. The next morning, I drove to the university's admissions office under the pretense of visiting an old colleague. I asked to see the records for Emily Harper, presenting myself as her grandfather and financial sponsor. The clerk hesitated, but when I slid my driver's license across the counter, she relented. The file showed her enrollment had been changed from fine arts to finance and business administration 3 days earlier. The new sponsor listed wasn't MIT, was Harper and Associates, David's company. On the way out, I spotted a man in a grey coat leaning against a pillar. He was the same one I'd seen on my porch days ago, the one who'd left the bank statement envelope. He looked up from his phone, met my eyes, then stepped into the crowd without a word. Back at home, I found a small padded mailer wedged between the storm door and the frame. Inside was a glossy printout of an online auction listing. Antique silver pocket watch, early 20th century engraved case. The bidding was already open. The photo looked almost identical to mine. My pulse thudded in my ears. I checked the safe again. The pouch was still there, but the drawstring was loose. The watch sat at an angle, as if someone had handled it recently. I locked it away and placed a strip of masking tape along the seam of the safe door. If anyone opened it again, I would know. That evening, Emily called from what sounded like a public space, the echo of voices and footsteps in the background. "Grandpa, I think they're watching my emails now. I'm using a friend's phone. Stay careful," I told her. "And don't mention the watch to anyone. If they try to take it, tell me immediately." "I will," she said. "I just don't want them to erase you from everything. They already told me not to put your name on my scholarship applications. They said it would confuse people. Erase me," 2 words that landed harder than any balance sheet. I thought of the safe, the stripped shelves, the scholarships stripped from her name. This wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting the story of who mattered in this family and in their version. I was already fading out of the picture. When the call ended, I sat at my desk, the masking tape still unbroken. I told myself that for now, the watch was safe, but I also knew that in this house, with these people circling, nothing stayed safe for long. It was a wet Thursday when Mark Reynolds called. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since we both walked out of the aerospace plant for the last time. His voice was older, but carried the same clipped precision it always had. "George, we need to talk. I've seen something you should know about." We met at a diner on the edge of town, the kind where the coffee is thin and the blinds never quite close. Mark slid into the booth opposite me, a folder tucked under his arm. His hair had gone silver, but his eyes still had the steady focus of a man who measured tolerances for a living. He didn't bother with small talk. "Your son-in-law filed a petition in county court. He's asking for a legal determination that you're no longer capable of managing your own finances." I stared at him. "He's what?" Mark opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the filing pages of legal language framing me as forgetful, erratic, susceptible to exploitation. In bold letters near the top, it read, "Petition for guardianship and control of financial assets." And there, under signatures, I saw a Devlin Ross. "She signed as a supporting witness," Mark said. "That means she's backing his claim." I'd mentored Evelyn when she didn't know the difference between a lien and a lease. I'd vouched for her when a senior partner questioned her judgment. And now her name sat there, lending weight to the idea that I should be stripped of authority over my own life. Mark leaned in. "If the court grants this, David will have the power to sell property, move funds, even decide where you live. He's attaching an inventory of your trust account as part of the petition." I thumbed through the stack. There it was, $15 million in detailed holdings, laid out for the court as if my life's work were nothing but a set of figures to be claimed. My jaw tightened. "Where did you get this?" "Friend in the clerk's office." "I thought you'd want to know. Before you're served papers." I left the diner with the folder under my arm, the rain soaking through my jacket. Back home, I sat in my study, staring at Evelyn's signature until the ink blurred. It wasn't just David anymore. He had help from someone who knew exactly how much this would cut. That evening, I drove to Evelyn's office. She looked surprised when I walked in unannounced. "George, I didn't expect. Why?" I asked, holding up the petition. "Why are you standing with him?" Her mouth tightened. "It's not personal. David came to me with concerns. I cut in. He's trying to take my life's work out from under me." She gestured for me to sit, but I stayed standing. "There are other factors," she said. "Things I can't discuss. Other factors, like your name on a property deed in Texas 30 years ago." I asked, watching her eyes narrow. She said nothing, confirming more than any admission could. "Evelyn, you owe me the truth," I said. "I owe you nothing that jeopardizes my family," she replied. Her voice was calm, but the weight behind it was real. "David's petition will be reviewed in 3 weeks. You can contest it, but you'll need representation." I left her office without another word. That night, the masking tape I'd placed on the seam of my safe was broken. The pocket watch was still inside, but it had been moved, tilted at an angle it had never rested in before. The next morning, I called Mark. "I need every scrap of information you can get on this petition, and I need it before the court date." "George," he said, "there's something else. That property in Texas, the one you bought in '84, it's in the petition as evidence you've made questionable financial decisions. They're framing it like you hid assets to avoid taxes." The air in the room seemed thinner. That land was one of the quiet pillars of the trust, bought for a fraction of its worth and held for decades. The accusation was a line being drawn, not just around my money, but around my character. By evening, I had the petition spread across my dining table, every page marked with notes. David's case was built on selective truths, padded with the kind of half-facts that sound convincing if you don't know the details. Evelyn's signature gave it legitimacy. Linda's absence from the document told me she'd either been kept out of the loop or had chosen not to put her name to it. That night, Emily called again, her voice low. "Grandpa, they've been talking about you like you're already not yourself. Dad said you'd be better off if someone else made the big decisions." I asked her to be careful, to keep her eyes and ears open. She promised she would. After the call, I sat in the quiet and realized this wasn't just about protecting what was mine. It was about proving to them, to the court, and maybe to myself, that I was still the man who had earned every cent in that trust. They were counting on me to be passive, to fade into the background while they moved the pieces into place. But I had spent a lifetime working within strict tolerances, reading the smallest deviations before they became failures, and I could see, now that this was a system they were building around me, a system I'd have to dismantle piece by piece before it locked shut. The envelope came in the afternoon mail, a thick manila packet with no return address. I knew before I opened it, it wouldn't be good news. Inside was a photocopy of a document I hadn't seen in years, my own durable power of attorney. There, in neat black ink, was Linda's signature alongside mine. The date in the corner read June 14th, 2009. I remembered the day clearly. She'd been 26, struggling with a legal mess after a co-worker falsely accused me of mismanaging a safety report. My attorney at the time had suggested signing the power of attorney so Linda could make quick financial moves if the investigation froze my accounts. The case was resolved, my name cleared, and I told myself we'd let the document gather dust in a drawer. But looking at it now, I understood it had never been locked away. I called Linda immediately. She answered on speaker, her voice echoing slightly. I imagined David standing just out of frame. Why am I seeing a copy of the power of attorney? From 2009, I asked. There was a pause before she replied, Dad, that was for your protection. We agreed to keep it in case something happened. In case something happened, I repeated. Not as a free pass to move money around without my consent. Her voice cooled. It's been in place for years. David's just making sure. Our family's finances are secure. Our family's finances or his? She didn't answer. I heard a door close, and her tone shifted quieter, but no softer. I did this to protect you then. I never imagined you'd use it to accuse me now. You protected me by giving someone else the keys to everything I own. I heard her draw in a breath, but she didn't speak. Then the line went dead. That night, I called Mark and asked him to dig into recent transactions tied to that document. 2 days later, he handed me a list over lunch. Transfers, consolidations, and account closures all under Linda's authority, all in the last 18 months. It's legal, he said. Ugly, but legal. With that document, she can act in your stead without asking you. When I got home, Emily was waiting on the porch. She had her sketch pad under one arm and a look in her eyes I hadn't seen before, half worry, half defiance. Mum says you're mad at her, she said as soon as I opened the door. I'm not mad, I told her. I'm disappointed she forgot why I trusted her in the first place. Emily followed me into the study. She set the sketch pad on my desk, flipping it open to a page where she'd drawn the pocket watch in startling detail, every engraving captured. In case they take it, she said. I looked at the drawing, then at her. You think they will? They talk about it like it's just another asset. Dad said once that collectors will pay a fortune for pieces with history. I locked the watch back in the safe and slid the drawing into the top drawer of my desk. History isn't something you sell, I said. She hesitated at the door. They want me to help with paperwork this weekend. Mum said it's for some property thing in Texas. Should I? I shook my head. Don't sign anything. Not a form, not a letter, nothing. Emily nodded, but I could tell the pressure at home was mounting. That weekend, I drove past Linda's house. Her car was in the driveway, and through the living room window I saw David at the dining table with stacks of documents spread before him. Linda sat across from him, pen in hand. I parked down the street and walked up, knocking once before stepping inside. The conversation froze. David leaned back in his chair, a smirk flickering at the corner of his mouth. George, he said. We're just tidying up some old paperwork. Linda avoided my eyes. On the table in front of her was a form authorizing the sale of one of my smaller investment properties, duplex in town that had been in the trust for years. That property stays where it is, I said. David's smirk widened. Linda has the authority to make that call. I gave her that authority to keep me safe, not to strip me bare. Linda set the pen down slowly. It's not like that, Dad. It's exactly like that, I said. You're using something, meant to protect me, to dismantle what I built. David gathered the papers into a stack, his eyes on mine. Sometimes, the hardest part of leadership is making choices other people don't like. I turned to Linda. You're not leading, you're following. And you're following him straight to a place you can't come back from. She flinched, but said nothing. I walked out without another word. the image of her pen poised over my property burning into my mind. Back home, I pulled the power of attorney from its envelope and laid it flat on the desk. My signature stared back at me, a reminder of a moment when trust had seemed unshakable. It wasn't enough to feel betrayed. I needed to find the limits of what that document had been used for, and whether there was a way to take it back before everything I valued was gone. It was just after dusk when I heard the knock. Emily stood on my porch, shoulders hunched against the November chill, a flat parcel clutched in both hands. She didn't wait for an invitation. She slipped inside as if she'd been followed. "I can't stay long," she said, eyes darting to the street. "They're at some fundraiser dinner." I told them I had a group project. She handed me the parcel. "Hide this." I unwrapped the paper and found a framed painting her work. It was the pocket watch, rendered in muted oils, every nick and groove on the silver case captured. The background was a wash of deep blues and greys, the watch face glowing faintly as though lit from within. "It's beautiful," I said, but she shook her head. "Look closer." She turned the frame over, loosening the backing with the tip of her fingernail. A folded sheet of paper slid out. I recognized the texture before I even unfolded its legal stock. Across the top, in bold, was property transfer agreement. The address printed underneath was in rural Texas. My hands tightened on the paper. This was the deed to the land I'd bought nearly 40 years ago, the one that had quietly grown into one of the most valuable pieces in my portfolio. "Where did you get this?" "In Mom's desk. Dad told her to keep it there until they could move it into his company's name. I heard them arguing about whether they needed your signature, or if the power of attorney would cover it." She looked at me, jaw set. "I thought you should have it first." I slid the deed back into the frame, securing it behind the painting. "If they know this is missing, they won't." I replaced it with a copy. I studied her, this granddaughter, who'd inherited none of her father's greed and all of her mother's stubbornness. "You realize, if they find out I know," she lifted her chin, "but I'm tired of them acting like you're not part of this family." I leaned the painting against the wall, the weight of it heavier than any canvas had a right to. Emily, listen carefully. This stays here. You don't talk about it. Not to your friends, not even to me unless we're alone. Understand?" She nodded. Before she left, she paused in the doorway. "They're selling the watch, Grandpa. I heard Dad on the phone with a buyer in Chicago. He said it'd cover the down payment on some investment property." The door clicked shut behind her, and the quiet felt sharper than usual. I went to the safe. The pouch was still there, but the watch was gone. That night, I drove without thinking, ending up parked across from David and Linda's house. Lights glowed in the front windows. Through a gap in the curtains, I saw David at his desk, holding the watch up to the light before placing it in a small velvet box. I could have walked up, could have pounded on the door and demanded it back, but I stayed in the car, memorizing every movement, every careless smile. Confronting him now would only tip my hand. Back home, I took the painting into my bedroom and leaned it inside the closet. Then I sat at my desk, going over the petition, the power of attorney, the property transfers. The pattern was clear. They weren't just taking, they were erasing. The watch, the land, the accounts. Pieces of my life's work, stripped away, as if I'd never earned them. The next day, I called Mark. "I need details on the Texas property," I said. "Every record, every transaction since the day I bought it." By evening, he was at my door with a folder. "It's clean," he said, No liens, no disputes. But here's the thing, you bought it from Ross Holdings. That's Evelyn's father's company. I flipped through the pages, each deed and tax receipt a reminder of deals struck in a different time. So if the land changes hands now, her family's name is back on it. And if anyone looks too closely at how it changed hands in '84, it could look like you were hiding assets. It was the missing puzzle piece. Evelyn's signature on David's petition wasn't about belief, it was about insurance, protecting her family's name at the cost of mine. That night, I locked the painting and the deed in the bottom drawer of my desk, replacing the key in a place no one would think to look. Then I sat back and let the anger settle into something colder. They thought I was cornered, that they could take everything and leave me with nothing but the memory of having once owned it. But they'd forgotten who built this life in the first place, and they had no idea that the most valuable piece of it was already out of their reach, hidden in plain sight on the canvas of a young woman who refused to let her grandfather be written out of his own story. Mark came by just after sunrise, his coat still damp from the fog outside. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "You were right about the Texas property," he said, setting a thick envelope on my kitchen table. "Ross Holdings was your seller back in '84. That was Evelyn's father's company." I poured us both coffee and listened as he laid out the history. The deed had passed from Ross Holdings to me for a fraction of its value, with no mortgage recorded. "Clean on paper," Mark said, "but anyone looking to make trouble could spin it as a tax dodge. And that's exactly what David's gearing up to do." I stared at the documents, remembering the handshake deal with Edward Ross. He'd been drowning in debt after a failed venture, and I'd bought the land to keep it out of the bank's hands. The understanding was that he'd buy it back when he recovered. He never did. I kept it, paid the taxes, and watched it rise in value until it became one of the crown jewels of my trust. Now it was the noose David planned to tighten. That afternoon, I drove to Evelyn's office without calling. Ahead, she looked up from her desk when I walked in, surprise flickering across her face. "George, I'm in the middle of your father sold me that land in '84, I said, dropping the folder on her desk. "And now your signature is on a petition that paints it as a criminal act." Her hands stilled on the keyboard. "This isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," I said. "You're helping David strip me down because you think it keeps your family's name out of the mud." Her eyes hardened. "You don't understand what's at stake for me." "I understand perfectly," I said. "Your father's reputation, your license, the Ross name. But you're willing to burn mine to keep yours clean." She looked away, staring at the framed degrees on the wall. "If the deal comes under scrutiny, my father's legacy will be destroyed. And yes, I'm protecting that, but you're not innocent either, George. You made that purchase knowing it skirted the edge." "I made it to help a friend," I said, "and I've carried it for decades without hiding it from a single tax form. If you believe David's line, you're choosing to forget that." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "David promised me he'd keep the land out of the court record if I supported his petition." "That's the only reason," I signed. "And you think he'll keep that promise?" Her silence told me she didn't. When I left her office, I knew I had to move faster. That night, Emily came by under the excuse of returning a book. She slipped into the study and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a USB drive. I copied files from Mum's laptop. She whispered, "Property transfers, bank stuff, and emails between Mum and Evelyn about the Texas land." I plugged it in after she left. The emails were damning. Evelyn warning Linda that the transfer might look suspicious. Linda assuring her David would handle George's cooperation. Another message from David. Once the deed is under my company, the old man can shout all he wants. We'll have the paper trail. I spent the next 2 days compiling everything, copies of my tax filings showing the land reported every year, records of the original purchase, and now Emily's stolen correspondence. Mark helped me put it in order, a shield and a sword in one stack. On the 3rd day, Evelyn called. "We need to meet," she said. Her voice had the brittle edge of someone who'd made a decision they didn't want to live with. We met in the back room of a quiet cafe. She slid into the seat opposite me, eyes scanning the room before she spoke. "David's not keeping his word. He's already lined up a buyer for the land, contingent on the guardianship going through. Once it's sold, he'll let the chips fall where they may about the past." I said nothing, letting the weight of her admission hang between us. "I can't undo my signature," she said, "but I can stall, and I can testify about his intent if it comes to a hearing." "Why?" "Because Emily came to see me," she said. "She told me about the watch, the safe, the painting. She said you're the only one who's ever really seen her, and I realized I was doing to you what people once did to my father, treating him like a problem to be managed instead of a man." We left the cafe separately. I drove home with the knowledge that Evelyn was no longer entirely in David's pocket, but she wasn't entirely in mine either. She was hedging her bets. That night, I took the painting from the closet and set it on the desk. The watch was gone, the land was under threat, and the petition was gaining momentum. But in that frame was the deed, safe for now, and in my hands was a small but vital shift in the balance. David still thought he was playing alone at the table. Soon enough, he'd find out the rules had changed. I had been moving my pieces quietly for weeks, letting David believe he'd forced me into a corner. But by the time January frost crusted the edges of my porch, I knew the board was mine to control. If I played the next move without hesitation, the petition for guardianship was inching through the county court. Evelyn's stall tactics bought me time, but not much. David's lawyers were pressing for an expedited hearing, citing my declining health and erratic financial behavior. I read every word in the filing, each lie crafted to sound like concern. It wasn't just an attack on my competence. It was an attempt to bury my life's work under a heap of paperwork. I called Mark first. "I'm ready to use the Texas file," I told him. "But I want it tied to David, not Evelyn." He grunted in approval. "You've got enough to prove he's moving on it for personal gain. Once the IRS gets a whiff of that, they won't care about the guardianship." That same afternoon, I visited Emily under the pretense of bringing her an old drafting set. Her room smelled faintly of turpentine and coffee, the floor scattered with canvases. She didn't even wait for me to sit down. "He's meeting with the buyer tomorrow," she said. "Some developer from Houston. Mum doesn't know," he told her. "It's about an insurance claim." I told her to keep her head down and her phone ready. If David signed anything, I wanted photographic proof. She nodded, but her hands shook as she adjusted the easel. "Grandpa, if this blows up, they're going to come after me, too." Met her eyes. "Then I'll make sure you're already untouchable when it happens." The next morning, while David was driving to his meeting, I walked into Evelyn's office unannounced again. This time, I wasn't asking for favors. I laid the USB drive on her desk, the same one Emily had given me weeks ago. This is my insurance policy, I said. And now it's yours too. If David tries to hang me, he drags you with him. But if you stand up in court and say the guardianship is a sham, we both walk out clean. She stared at the drive like, it might burn through the wood. You'd really put me on the stand. You're already on the record, I said. The only choice left is which side of the line you stand on. She didn't answer, but she didn't push the drive back. Across the desk either. That was enough for me by noon. Emily's text came through. A grainy photo of David's hand on a contract, pen mid-stroke. A suited man leaning over the page. The header read Preliminary Sales Agreement, Harper Development, LLC. That was all I needed. I spent the evening preparing my counterstrike. Copies of the sales agreement and the email chain between David and the buyer went into a sealed packet. Another packet held the guardianship petition, annotated in red ink to show every falsehood. The third packet, the one with the most weight contained, the IRS complaint form, already filled in with dates, amounts, and wire transfer records Mark had pulled. That night, I slept better than I had in months. 2 days later, I made my move. I walked into the courthouse with my cane tapping a slow rhythm on the tile, handing one packet to the clerk for the judge, another to the county prosecutor's office, and the last addressed to a P.O. box in Ogden, Utah, to the hands of a postal clerk. Once that envelope was in the mail, there was no pulling it back. By the time I reached home, Linda's car was already in my driveway. She was standing on the porch, arms crossed, her face pale. "What did you do?" she demanded before I'd even set foot on the steps. "I protected what's mine." I said simply, "David says you've gone too far this time." "David's been saying a lot of things lately," I replied. "But soon, other people will be saying them about him." She hesitated, the edge in her voice giving way to something else, fear, maybe. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our family?" "I do," I said, brushing past her to unlock the door. "That's why I didn't do it sooner." Inside, the phone was already ringing. Mark's voice was sharp with satisfaction. The buyer pulled out. "Word's out that Harper Development is under IRS review." I hung up without gloating. It wasn't over yet, not until the court date, but the ground under David's feet had cracked. The man who thought he could erase me with a few signatures was about to find himself fighting for his own name, his own money, his own survival, and I had no intention of giving him room to recover. The winter sun was setting low when I arrived. At the country club, it was the same room where David humiliated me months ago, the same polished wood floors, the same crystal chandeliers. But tonight, the air was different. This wasn't his stage anymore. It was mine. Linda stood near the entrance, tense, her hands gripping a clutch bag like it might keep her steady. She looked smaller than I remembered. David was already at the center of the room, sleeves rolled up, voice raised as he told a group of men about his upcoming development in Texas and how he was securing new investments. I waited until his laughter echoed, then walked straight into the middle of his circle. "I thought I'd save you a trip, David," I said loud enough for every table to hear. "You won't have to wait for the mail to find out what you've lost." The room stilled. A few heads turned. Whispers rippled. I pulled an envelope from my coat pocket and dropped it onto the table beside him. "That's the notarized update to my will. Effective immediately, you have no stake, no claim on my trust, my property, or my name." His smirk cracked. "You can't, I can," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade, and I did. "You'll also be pleased too." No, the IRS has a copy of your Texas deal. I imagine they'll have some questions about where the money came from. Linda's face drained of color. One of David's companions shifted uncomfortably and walked away. The murmurs grew louder then. Emily stepped forward from the back of the room. She was holding a small wrapped package. "Grandpa," she said, her voice clear, "I think this belongs to you." She handed it over. I opened the box to find a painting hers of a pocket watch, the same one my father left me, the one David sold. But in her rendering, the watch was whole again, suspended above a shadowy figure walking alone on a long road. The applause started quietly, a few polite claps from the older members. Then it grew, a soft tide of approval from people who'd known me for decades. David's jaw tightened. He turned to leave, but not before muttering something to Linda, who refused to follow him. That night, the trust was formally amended to give Emily the lion's share of my estate, with a portion earmarked for a scholarship in Evelyn's father's name. David's accounts, I later learned, were frozen within the week. By spring, Harper Development filed for bankruptcy. I didn't celebrate. Victory has a strange taste when it comes at the cost of blood ties, even poisoned ones. Looking back now, I see the path as clearly as the lines on my hand. They thought age made me fragile, that love made me blind, that trust made me weak. What they didn't understand is that all three age, love, and trust are weapons if you learn to wield them. Age taught me patience. Love gave me motive. And trust. Trust showed me exactly where to strike when it was broken. The truth I've learned is this: in family battles, you won't always get justice from the world, so you have to build your own. Not with rage that burns too fast, but with precision. You wait, you gather, you make every move count. And when the moment comes, you don't hesitate, because hesitation is the crack where manipulation seeps back in. If you've been pushed aside, if your worth has been measured only in what can be taken from you, remember this: silence is not surrender. It's the quiet before a calculated answer. Protect what matters, and don't announce your war until the first strike is already done. To those watching who feel the weight of betrayal pressing in on them, don't waste time wishing people would change. Use that time to change the ending. They expect. You are more dangerous to your enemies when they believe you've already been beaten. And if you've walked through the same darkness I have, know this: you can get to the other side. It's not about winning them over. It's about winning yourself back. If my story gave you even a spark of that strength, then stay with me for the next one. There's more to tell, and I'd like you there when I do.